Welcome back to my channel. My name is Shannon, and today we're going to talk about all things dorm roommate disagreements. To give you some background, I worked for 12 years in the college atmosphere, many of those years spent working in residence life, so working with our students living in the dorms, as well as working on the scholarship side, so awarding scholarships to students, and working behind the scenes with donors to create scholarships for students. I have seen it all when it comes to dorm life. And I want to chat through with you the most common issues that students face when moving into the dorms, really focused around living with another person or people. Sometimes our students are living with one roommate, sometimes they're living with 2 or 3 or 4. It just depends on the situation and the type of room they end up living in the dorms. So we're going to chat through some of those typical things that students have issues with, how your student may be able to avoid some of those common issues, and then beyond that, what they can do if they're facing challenges with their roommate. So let's jump on in. So there's 2 types of living situations that students typically have that may or may not have struggles with. The first situation is they are living with a brand new person or persons that they just met at move-in. And that can mean even they met each other over the summer when they got assigned to be roommates together, or through a roommate matching process, or they literally meet them for the first time at move-in. Now, this can be a challenging situation because beyond just living in the dorms for the first time and being away from home, they have met a brand new person who they're going to be living with, and they have to learn all about them, their ins and outs, things they like, things they dislike, boundaries, and also just learning to live with one another in a room that is not at home with parents or family members who are, more the adult figure in the situation. Now, situation number 2 is living with someone that they are friends with. Now, I saw this all the time in the dorms where students who were good friends in high school or decent friends would sign up to be roommates in the dorms together. And that has its completely own different set of challenges, because just because you're good friends with someone does not mean you should live together. And this can be common from students signing up to be roommates together who already know each other, or let's say people who meet each other at move-in and are like, oh, we're friendly, we're good friends, we have all these things in common, but still doesn't mean they should be living together. A great example of this is me and my freshman year roommate. We hit it off right from the bat. We met first day at move-in. Back then, you did not find out who your roommate was until you physically moved into the dorms. And we were good friends, but we quickly learned throughout the year that we were not meant to live together. We are great friends, we have so many things in common, we like to watch the same things, we could chat, we could support each other, but living together was not the best thing. We had different versions of cleanliness, we had different bedtime routines, we just were too different when it came to living in the same room, but we maintained our friendship all throughout college and beyond because we're good friends. We're just not meant to be living together. Even now as adults, I could say we would not live together. We would not probably even really share a hotel room together because we're just different in those aspects, and that's completely okay. Many times your student may struggle, and I sell this all the time, where students always want this designer, TikTok, Instagram roommate situation where they're best friends and they do everything together and their dorm room is just amazing, it's gorgeous, and they're besties forever. When really, for most students, you just need a good, safe, and respectful living situation. It doesn't mean you have to be best friends with your roommate or your roommates. You just have to be respectful towards one another, respect each other's boundaries, and communicate. You can be friends, but that does not mean you have to be friends. I think we're seeing this a lot right now with social media, especially over the summer prior to the dorms opening. You'll see so many TikToks and Instagram stories being posted of students meeting with their roommates, of chatting with their roommates ahead of time, of planning and decorating gorgeous dorm rooms with things that were not available back when we went to college. Our dorm rooms did not look like that. They were not designer aesthetic. And it can feel this big FOMO, the fear of missing out, when you're seeing on social media and you're bombarded with all these stories of roommates being besties before they're even at college and having perfect dorm rooms. And it sets our students up for failure, if I'm being honest, because it's created this whole design of college must be perfect, your dorm room must be perfect, you must be besties with your roommate to have a successful freshman year. And that's just not true. Trying to set our students up for success means getting them the things that they need. Truly in dorm rooms, you need your school supplies, your sleeping supplies, your shower supplies and clothes. Like, you don't need all the decor. And with your roommate, you just need to be respectful towards one another and communicate. Like, it's not very complicated, but social media has added this aspect that is so much more complicated and is setting our students up for a desire that does not need to be there and an expectation that's not reality for, I'd say, 95% of the students that I worked with. It's not real. So I do think it's important to start having those conversations with your student prior to even the summer before college about what their expectations are with their roommate and their living situation. It does not need to be perfect. Their entire dorm room and their living situation with their roommate does not need to be Instagrammable. It does not need to be TikTok viral worthy. It needs to be a respectful and safe place for them to live and a good cordial relationship with one another. I know that's a hard challenge and I don't have all the answers to help really tell you what to do and what to tell them, because some of your students are going to set themselves up for that failure just because of what they're being bombarded with social media. So the sooner you start having those conversations of having realistic expectations, that will help. It may not solve the issue, but it will be helpful. So I want to chat with you now about the main issues I have seen roommates have. And when I'm talking about roommates, I'm often used to refer as like a double room, like one roommate and the other, your student and their roommate. But this is also the same thing for triple rooms with 3 people living in them, for quad rooms with 4 people living in them. And sometimes, there are bigger rooms or there's suite styles, but these are common in all those situations. So let's touch through the most common things that students have issues with one another about. The biggest one I've seen over all my years is borrowing each other's things without asking. This is like so simple, and you'll see this with students, at home, sometimes with sibling dynamics, borrowing each other's things without asking. But at school, it becomes even heightened because all they own at college is what's in their dorm room, or maybe their car if they have a car, but the things they bring with them are so personal for them. But borrowing things without asking causes drama very quickly. Now our next one is having people over late or over often, especially without asking the roommate if it's okay to have people over. And it can be awesome to have the social dorm room where everyone wants to come hang out, wants to chat, wants to watch movies. But if they're not communicating with their roommate about asking, is it okay to have people over, this can disturb roommates, sleep schedule, study schedule, relaxation schedule. Sometimes we just need to decompress, especially in dorm life. You have people everywhere. There's people in the bathroom, the hallway, the lounges. Your room is a safe space. And so having people all over all the time, especially if it's late or it's so often, can sometimes be a challenge for roommates. Having significant others over, having significant others spend the night, especially without communicating ahead of time, or this happening multiple times per week, can be a big challenge for roommate partners. This is one that's hard because, for the first time for many of these students, they're getting to explore their personal relationships with their partner or partners of choice and be able to have less boundaries, less rules from parents and, loved ones. So they're able to spend the night with one another. They're able to do different activities. And so they want to have those moments and have time together. But that can create a harsh dynamic with roommates if roommates start to feel like the significant other's over all the time, like they can't spend time in their own room. If they're being kicked out of their own room for their roommate to engage in different activities, it can be very challenging finding that balance. And if they're not communicating, it makes it even worse. Allowing friends to sit on their roommate's bed, use their roommate's furniture, or sleep in their roommate's bed when they are not around is also a big boundary that's often crossed. Now, I'd see this all the time where you have a roommate pair where one goes home often for the weekend and they allow somebody to sleep on top of or in their roommate's bed and then not say anything. That causes drama real quick. I mean, if you can imagine somebody who's not your friend spending the night in your bed and you didn't give them permission, that's gonna feel awkward and feel like a betrayal pretty quickly. Also, sometimes just having people sitting on people's beds, you come into your bedroom and there's a ton of your roommate's friends there. They're sitting on your desk, on your bed, on your chair, and using all of your available space. That can be boundary crossing, because they're taking over your side of the room, but also you don't know where they've been. So I've always had this rule, and I have it now with my kids, of no outside clothes allowed on the bed. And I started that in college because I quickly realized my friends and I, you're sitting on benches at school, you're sitting at the classroom desks on campus. and all over, and none of those places are usually cleaned, and then you're sitting in your jeans on your bed like, ugh, germs. And so it's another added layer of boundaries. For me, it was always gross. I was like, you're not allowed to sit on my bed if you're wearing outside clothes. If you're wearing like lounge clothes that you wore in the dorm room, cool beans. But, you know, that can cross people's boundaries pretty quickly. A big one that we saw in the dorms all the time was eating one another's food without asking. This becomes huge. Like, you know, snacks are commodity. Snacks are not cheap. And sometimes snacks can be our way to eat when we're not able to access the dining hall, or they can be a reminder of home or a comfort item. And roommates easily cross this line all the time, eating each other's snacks or eating each other's food. Using one another's hygiene or makeup products without asking, you know, that's an overall roommate issue. If your shampoo gets used by your roommate without, you know, you being asked and it goes out quicker, that's more money you're spending and it's more frustration. You know, it's a communication issue. It's also the issue of boundaries right there. And the final one that we saw the most with roommate disagreements is having different levels of cleanliness. So maybe one roommate is, you know, rather clean, where the other one leaves their side of the room messy, doesn't do laundry very frequently, even if it smells a little bit, leaves dishes out or food out to rot, doesn't take their trash out. That causes roommate issues real quick. We all have different versions of clean and what our different standard of cleanliness is. And in a dorm room that's typically, you know, a 12 by 8 small room, that can cause an issue really quickly. So those were the top roommate disagreement issues that we saw come up in the dorms. I would say all of these stem back towards roommates asking permission to use items, asking permission to have friends or significant others over, communicating their boundaries, and responding to when boundaries are broken. And I will always advise for you to chat with your student about setting boundaries with their roommate, being very clear. If something starts to feel like it's crossing a boundary and they've not communicated it, they need to communicate it. And if they have communicated that boundary and it gets crossed, they need to have a face-to-face conversation with their roommate. They can't text them. They need to actually chat with them and talk through how it's making them feel and how it crossed their boundary. Now, if your student is having a roommate disagreement, besides the things we just talked about, what can they really do about it? Now, communication is the biggest thing, but let's talk through the steps your student should take. So step number 1 your student should take is self-reflection. Really, they need to sit by themselves and think about what is going on, what happened, and what is the main issue that is happening, what they want to happen from here, so what action they want taken, and then what can be done to avoid this situation in the future. That is step number 1. They need to truly sit with themselves and figure out what they want. So many times students would tell me, oh, I'm just so irritated them doing this. I'd be like, okay, well, what do you want? Like, what do you want to happen from here? What is your boundary? Because if you can't communicate with those, your roommate doesn't know if they're breaking or jumping or leaping over those boundaries unless we communicate them. So your student needs to sit down. They can do it on their own. Maybe they have a chat or a FaceTime with you and really figure out what those boundaries are. And I do find it helpful to write those down. So when they're having conversations, you know, they're not forgetting it in the moment. They have it written down for them to read from if they need to or to reference from. Step number 2 is to have a one-on-one conversation with their roommate about just those things we talked about. What is going on? What do they want to happen from here? And what this can be done to avoid in the future. They need to not be texting this. They need to not be having this conversation with friends around. They should not be blitzing their roommate with this kind of conversation, you know, just out of the blue. They should ask their roommate, like, hey, tonight can we talk, just you and me? They could have that conversation in their dorm room, or sometimes it's even helpful to go out to coffee or something and be out of the space to have that conversation. But they need to have that conversation one-on-one together. Texting it can just lead to miscommunication and drama. Having friends there may or may not help the situation because friends can add in their own opinion and that might not be helpful in the situation. So they need to have that conversation one-on-one. Now, step number 3, if they are struggling throughout this process, they need to go to their RA. It is okay to go to the RA for advice. RAs are trained on how to have these kind of conversations. So the RA could first provide your student with some tips and tricks on how to have those conversations with their roommate, really talk through getting them to the point of knowing what they're wanting from this situation and how it can, you know, how we can avoid issues in the future, as well as the RA is able to sit down and mediate that conversation between the students. We always want the student to try first on their own, just their roommates, and then from there, if it's still not getting through, bring the RA in. The RAs have been trained to mediate the conversation, as well as at many schools, they're going to complete what's called a roommate agreement. So at some schools, roommate agreements are required and done in the first few weeks of the semester, and in some schools they're only done at times of need. Now, what is a roommate agreement? It is a beautiful, beautiful packet of paper or piece of paper where your student gets to go through and chat through all the things of their room. How often are they going to take the trash out? How are they going to communicate with each other if they want to have friends over? How often are they going to do laundry? What are the roommates going to do if they disagree with each other about something or someone crossed a boundary? What are things they're okay with their roommate borrowing or using without asking? What are things they want their roommate to ask first before they use? All of these questions, sometimes they can be tough to get an answer right away, but it's important for your student to take that process seriously with their RA and their roommate, as this contract is something that they can go back to as disagreements occur in the future or as future challenges occur. Really, it's asking all these questions ahead of time to try to get ahead of more problems happening. And my biggest pet peeve as a staff member was whenever we would have questions on there of like, how will you communicate with your roommate if they're doing something that bothers you? And so many times students just want to say, oh, we'll talk about it. And I'm sitting there as professional staff like, no, you're not. You can't tell me here that every single time your roommate does something that pisses you off, that you are only going to go talk to your roommate about it in person. And you're not going to go tell your mom, which that's okay. Go tell other friends, talk shit about them. Like you're in a stew and internally it's going to get bigger and bigger messy. You need to be realistic with it. And so sometimes it is, hey, we're going to go talk to the RA because we've already talked about this boundary and we're going to have another mediation conversation. Or, hey, we set up a system of how we can tell each other we need to get these guests out of our room because this is breaking my boundary. Maybe there's a text signal, maybe they send each other a specific emoji to say, get these people out of my bedroom. I want to go to bed. They need to be real when they're doing this and vulnerable because these agreements are very helpful. What's also good for you to know is roommates agreements can be revisited and edited at any time. So if your student felt comfortable with something at the beginning of the year, like they were cool with their roommate eating their snacks as long as they asked first, and then we're getting towards the middle of the year and they're like, oh my gosh, my roommate asks me every single day if they can eat my snacks, like get your own snacks. They can revisit the roommate contract with their RA and their roommate and change this at any time because roommate dynamics change throughout the entire year. Our boundaries change across the entire year. Sometimes we feel like we're cool with stuff in the beginning and then because it becomes a pattern, it's not cool anymore. These can be adjusted and changed. The RA is there to be a resource for your student. Now, let's be real. When our own baby is dealing with challenges with their roommate, we as family members want to swoop in and save our sweet little angel from dealing with all these problems. But I am going to implore you as their family member, as their support system, to let them handle their own battles. Unless there's a situation going on that is truly dangerous or truly illegal, you should not be getting involved. You can be a support system for your student. You could be a sounding board. You can listen to them, let them vent, let them come home if they need to come home and cool off. But please do not be calling housing. Please do not be trying to contact the RA. Please do not contact the roommate. You will only add gasoline to the fire. If something that's going on that's truly unsafe, like your student has been threatened, or truly illegal, like there are actual drugs or weapons in the room, please let your student handle it. This is a great learning lesson for them. They have to learn how to advocate for themselves. They have to learn to communicate. If they don't learn it now, it's not going to set them up for success later as an adult. They have to be able to do those things at their own because we're not always going to be around to do it for them. So now let's chat about movement. So many times when roommate conflicts happen, our first instinct as family members and sometimes for our students is, I want to move from the situation. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to deal with it. Avoidance gets us nowhere. Unless it's unsafe, unless there's illegal things going on, we have to do our best as housing professionals and those that live in the dorms to figure out how to make it work as best as we can first before we jump to movements. But I want to talk to you about the movement process. So for the most part, movements are a semi-slow process. It takes a lot of behind the scenes work and coordination to make sure we have open bed spaces, to make sure those bed spaces are clean, to communicate with current roommates that they're going to be getting a new person moving into that room, or the current roommate that's being left of hey, your roommate is leaving. So the movement process does take time. Unless there's a true emergency situation, and sometimes things can be sped up, or there's emergency temporary housing students can be moved to until a final bed space is ready for them so we can have them safe. In the middle of the night, if something happens, oftentimes housing will have an emergency space we can move them to so they're safe for the night. And then the next day, we'll deal with all the logistics of truly getting them moved. But let's talk through that process. If your student has done everything they can, they've tried talking to their roommate, they've got their RA involved, they've done roommate contracts, they've been communicating their boundaries, and when those boundaries have been crossed, they can enter into the movement process. Now, every school has a different version of this. Most nowadays have an online portal where a student submits a request, and they are typically handled on a first come, first served basis. So as they're entered, they go from the top of the list. Now, sometimes it can be frustrating because your student will put in a movement request and then they feel like they are getting jumped on the list. This can happen for different reasons. Maybe there's some unsafe situations happening. Maybe there's some maintenance issues happening. I can tell you one year I had these sweet boys come in saying, hey, we need to move, there's some stuff going on in our room. But they weren't communicating what was happening, and when I questioned it, they weren't talking about it. And I was like, what is happening here? Why do you all want to suddenly move the last month of school? And then their RA came down and said they're having an infestation of bees. A queen bee flew in their window and all the bees were coming with it. It was one of the most craziest situations I've ever dealt with. But they didn't communicate what was going on, so other movements were happening. And they're like, why aren't we being moved? I'm like, wait, I keep asking you what's going on until they're already advocated them. I didn't know. Of course, if I knew there was bees attacking in their room, they would have been moved right away. So sometimes students are going to be moved depending on the amount of information that's there or about the request. So a lot of times students will request a single room, where there's not a lot of single rooms on most campuses. Or they ask to move to a very specific community that might not have any beds open, versus a student who applied later than them who is open to many more communities and there are bed spaces open in those communities. Your student just needs to be patient through that process, keep communicating with their RA, respond to emails, and respond to calls. For the most part, in a movement process, they're going to be emailed by either the housing office or some of the professional staff. And if they don't respond to emails, the staff can't do anything about it if your student's not communicating with them. So they need to be checking their school email. I also want you to know that there can be freezes in movement processes. So for many schools, there's a freeze at the beginning of the semester or quarter, so the beginning of the school year, and a freeze towards the end of the semester or quarter or end of the school year. Now, this is done because the movement process takes a lot of paperwork and coordination. And if we're in the last, month of school, it's typically not worth it to move people unless there's a true maintenance issue or a safety issue. It's time to just kind of tough it out and ride it out. You're only going to be there a few more weeks. And it doesn't make sense to be moving people unless something is truly happening. If you're just disagreeing with one another, you can handle that for a few more weeks. There may also be the possibility of not allowing movements if there are no open beds. We can't force people to move and swap with people because your student wants to move or is uncomfortable in their situation. Sometimes we can do swaps if all parties are in agreement, and that was always one of my favorite moves because if two rooms know that the roommates want to live with each other, we can swap people super fast. That's easy peasy. But if your student's demanding we move them into a different room and there are no open beds, we can't do anything about it unless there's a true unsafe situation. And that's something I really want you to work on with talking with your student on is the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. Unsafe means they have been threatened. There's a possible of bodily or mental harm to them being in that situation. Being uncomfortable just means they're uncomfortable. It doesn't mean they're unsafe. It can mean they're unhappy. And sometimes, that can later beyond become a bigger unsafe issue. But for the most part, we need to allow our students to live in the uncomfortable situations. They can get through them. They have to communicate, they have to talk it out, they have to go through the processes. Being uncomfortable is okay. You are not unsafe if you are uncomfortable. Being truly unsafe is a different situation where there is the true potential or actually happening body or physical or mental harm to the individual. So please start having those conversations with your student. It's okay to be uncomfortable. A lot of things that are going to happen in college are being uncomfortable because it's learning. It's different situations we've not been through before. And that is going to happen at different times living with roommates in the dorms. Alright, y'all, so those were the top reasons that roommates have disagreements in the dorms, situations that they can work through. As we've talked throughout this, the main theme is communication, communicating those boundaries, communicating when boundaries and lines have been crossed, and going through those steps of what to do in those situations, and then potentials for movement. If your student or you yourself have ever experienced different roommate disagreements in the dorms, please feel free to add those to the comments below and let us know what you or your student did about it, or what you would do now, knowing information in retrospect. It's really challenging for all of us. We make decisions in the moment or actions in the moment, and then later on, once we've had time to separate ourselves from the situation and reflect, we might do things differently. So let's provide that advice to one another and add those in the comments below. If you liked today's video, please feel free to go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every month all about college life. And so this is dorm life, RAs, scholarships, on-campus jobs. I'm trying to give all of my years of working in colleges, all that information over to y'all to be able to support your student. I hope you all have a wonderful day and you're staying healthy.